Well, hello, confirmands. This is the lesson number 14, year 1, lesson 14. It's a lesson on Ruth and Samuel. This is going up early. Remember, there is no confirmation on February 16th. We're not gathering, not online, not on person. We're going to talk about this lesson on February 23rd. And so it's going up early. You're going to have opportunities to look at it, to do your homework, and then to just coast. All right. So Ruth and Samuel, year 1, lesson 14. Again, we're going to talk about this on February 23rd. All right. Hope you got it. The other thing, of course, is that I hope to do a better job this time on the phrase that pays. I muffed it last week. I'm mad at myself because, it was a good quote. That integrity is what you do when no one is watching. And so I'll try to do better. I always am trying. And so let's see what we have. So let's start with Ruth. We've been talking about military leaders and kings and judges and people who are really important. And this first story this week is about somebody who's not important. She's not an Israelite. She's a Moabite. But she becomes important because God chooses her and uses her. So our story starts in Bethlehem, where there's a famine, and there's a family that is affected by the famine. A mom, dad, two sons, and they hear that there is food and work in Moab, and so they leave Bethlehem and they go to Moab. Now things are good there for a while, but then the dad dies, and so it's just the two boys and their mom. The boys, they keep their responsibilities, they do their work, and they take care of their mom, Naomi, for a number of years. They grow up, they get married. One marries a woman named Ruth, and one marries a woman named Orpah. And again, for a while, things are good. But then the two boys die, and so it's just the three women alone. And there's no one to take care of them. It's a difficult time, and so Naomi decides that she's going to go back to Bethlehem. And so she packs up her stuff and she heads back to Bethlehem, and her two daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth, they come with her for a while. And Naomi says to them, "Girls, listen, I'm too old to get married and have more sons. You should go back to your family houses. There's no reason for you to come with me. My life is awful. I've lost my husband, I've lost my sons, but you guys are young enough to get married again and to have good lives. You should go back." And Orpah, first protests a little bit, but then she says, yeah, okay, that's probably true. And she turns her face back to Moab and she heads back home. Naomi says to Ruth, "You should go with your sister-in-law. You should go with Orpah." And Naomi says, "No, don't send me away from you. I'm going to go where you go. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God." And Naomi hears in that, this sincerity, this belief that Ruth is to be with her. And so Naomi agrees that Ruth can come back to Bethlehem, back to Israel with her. So the first two words in this week's phrase that pays, if you. So anyway, they get back to Bethlehem. Naomi's friends barely recognize her because she's been so changed by grief. And these two women set up house. They are incredibly poor. They have no money. They have no way to get money. And Naomi tells Ruth about a custom in Israel that exists for the poor, that when farmers harvest their fields, they don't harvest all the way to the edges, that the edges are left for the poor to gather some food, and that, they cut grain by hand, of course. There's no machinery in this time. And if anything drops to the ground, they don't pick it up. That's for the poor too. And so the poor, they do what's called gleaning. They go to the fields and they pick up the dropped grain and the standing grain around the edges, and that's one of the ways that the poor are provided for. And so Ruth learns about this, and she decides to go gleaning. And she winds up in the fields of a very rich guy named Boaz. And she just works like crazy. Now, Boaz visits his field and he sees this really attractive young woman that he doesn't know working in his field. And he asks his workers, who is that? And they say, well, that's Naomi's daughter-in-law, Ruth. Well, what's up with her? Well, she's been working all day. She hasn't taken a single break. And Boaz goes over to her and he says, listen, if you're thirsty, you can drink from the water jugs that I have here for my servants, and you should eat with my female servants, and you should stay with them so that no one troubles you, no one harasses you, and you should come back here every day, and you should stay with my people, eat with my people. They'll protect you, and you should glean in my fields during the entirety of the harvest. And Ruth thinks that that's awesome, and Boaz, nudges the laborers, and he says, drop a little grain in front of Ruth, and so she winds up making a killing, and she just has all kinds of grain when she goes back to see Naomi that night. And Naomi says, where were you? And Ruth said, there was this guy, I landed in his field, a guy named Boaz, and he took care of me. It was very, very nice. And Ruth said, he's a relative of my husband, of my late husband. So yeah, just stay with him, do what he says. He will protect and take care of you. That is a great, great thing. The next two words of the phrase that pays: love deeply. Love deeply. At any rate, the harvest continues, and at the end of the harvest, there's a feast, and there is a party, and everybody's happy, and everybody camps out. And Naomi says to Ruth, at the party, you should go to Boaz and you should uncover his feet, just lay down next to him in the dark and uncover his feet, and he'll know what to do. Now, here's the thing that you need to know. The uncover the feet thing, that's a polite way to talk. Feet is a polite way to talk about genitals. That in the Bible, whenever feet are being covered, it ain't feet. So Ruth goes and she climbs into Boaz's sleeping bag, which is an incredible risk, but that's what she does. And in the morning, they spend the night, and in the morning Boaz says to her, listen, I'm going to figure out, I'm going to try to marry you. There is one relative that is closer to your family, to your father-in-law's family, than I am. Remember, this was the deal that when a man died, his wife would be passed to a near relative, where she would become a second or a third or a fourth wife to that near relative, and that any children she had with that near relative would be considered the children of the dead person for purposes of inheritance, so that wealth wouldn't get concentrated, it would stay spread out. So Boaz says to Ruth, I'm going to take care of you. It might not be me that winds up marrying you, but I'm going to see what I can do. So Boaz goes to the city gates that next day, and he sees this other relative passing by, and he says, friend, come talk to me. There's something that we have to work out. And so he gathers the elders around, and he says to this other man, both of us are related to Naomi's late husband. You have a better claim. So the way I reckon it, you're in charge of his wealth. You inherit his fields and all of his property. And the man said, hot diggity. And Boaz said, one more thing though, you got to take care of Naomi, and you got to marry Ruth, and you got to have children by her to inherit this property. You're not really going to get the property, you're just going to be the custodian of it. And the guy said, my life is full, I'm kind of busy. Do you want her? And Boaz said, well, all right. And so Boaz marries Ruth, and they wind up having a little baby. That baby's name is Obed, and Obed grows up and gets married and has a baby named Jesse, and Jesse grows up and gets married and has a baby named David, who becomes the king of Israel. So there's a story about and of course David is an ancestor of Jesus, that one of Jesus' relatives, one of his ancestors, one of David's ancestors, is this poor, ordinary, faithful, hard-working woman from Moab that God intends to set the whole world free. The next words of the phrase that pays, your, Y-O-U apostrophe R-E, as in you are, you're going. You're going. You should have 6 words now in the phrase that pays. I'm working so much harder this week. All right. The next story is about Samuel. Our story with Samuel starts with another odd family, a husband with 2 wives. One of his wives was named Hannah. She didn't have any children. His other wife had lots of kids, and she would tease Hannah. She would insult Hannah because in this time in history, the purpose of a woman was to have children, preferably sons, and that Hannah had not had any, and so this other wife rode her pretty hard. Hannah would cry, and her husband would say, "Oh, Hannah, isn't it enough that you have me? I love you so." But it wasn't. It wasn't. Now, every year this family would go up to the temple at Shiloh, to the tabernacle at Shiloh, and they would worship there. They would offer sacrifices and worship. And Hannah was heartbroken, and she went into the tabernacle, and she was praying, and she was weeping, and her mouth was moving, but she wasn't making sounds. And Eli, the priest, saw her, and Eli thought she was drunk. Excuse me. And Eli said to her, "What's wrong with you? You're going to drink and show up at church? There's something wrong with you, woman." And Hannah says, No, I'm not drunk. I was praying to God that God would give me a son. And she was also praying a promise that if God gave her a son, she would give the son back to God. We'll get there. Eli says to her, "May God give you what you have asked for." And so Hannah dries her tears, and she goes back home with her husband, and very quickly they turn up pregnant, and it is a little boy. And when the child is 4 years old, Hannah brings him back to the temple with a little suitcase and some food, and says to Eli, "I'm not sure if you remember me. You thought I was drunk when I was praying, but I was praying that God would give me this little boy, and I promised God that if he gave me the little boy, I would give the boy back to God." And Eli says, "Wowza. Okay." And so Samuel goes, lives there with Eli and Eli's sons in the tabernacle of the Lord, and learns all the things that go into being a priest. The next 2 words of the phrase that pays, to get. To get. So Samuel's a little guy. I don't know how old he is. Is he 6? Is he 7? Is he 8? He sleeps in the same room as the Ark of the Covenant. And one night when he's asleep, God calls his name, Samuel. Samuel. Samuel gets up and he runs to Eli. "What do you want?" And Eli says, I didn't call you. Go back to bed." And so Samuel lays down again, and again God says to him, "Samuel, Samuel." And Samuel pops up and he runs to Eli. "What do you want?" And Eli says, "Look, you crazy kid, I didn't call you. Go back to bed." And so Samuel goes back to bed. "Samuel, Samuel." He pops up, runs to Eli. "Yeah, what do you want?" Eli says, "Listen." "Oh. Yeah, it's not me calling you, boy, it's God. And so the next time you hear the voice, say, 'Speak, Lord, your servant listens.'" And Samuel, "Speak, Lord, your servant listens. Speak, Lord, your servant listens. Speak, Lord, your servant listens." And he goes back to bed, and he's laying there, and God says, "Samuel, Samuel." And Samuel says, "Speak, Lord, for your servant listens." And God gave him an earful. See, the deal was that Eli's older sons were training to be priests too, but they were bad dudes. They took advantage of people. They would harass and sexually abuse women who came to the temple. They would steal sacrifices from people. They were just bad men. And God tells Samuel, "I've been watching these bad sons of Eli. I'm going to take the priesthood away from his family. His sons are not going to be priests after him. I've had it, and that's it." And Samuel, lays down and I guess tries to sleep the rest of the night. You can't imagine how stirred up a little kid would be, right? In the morning, Eli calls Samuel and says to him, "Was it God?" And Samuel says, "Yeah." "Tell me what he said, and don't leave anything out. I want to hear it all." And Samuel swallows, and he tells Eli everything. That your sons are bad men. God knows they're bad men. God's going to take the priesthood away from your family, and there's no undoing it. And Eli says, "It is the word of the Lord. Whatever he thinks is right is right." So the next two words, hurt badly. Hurt badly. Okay. So time goes on, and the Philistines are making trouble. This is a local people that fight periodically with Israel. The Philistines are making trouble. We met them with Samson. Remember? The Philistines are making trouble, and the armies of Israel say, "You know what we need? We need to go to battle against these guys, and we need a lucky charm when we go to battle. Let's take the Ark of the Covenant with us into battle against the Philistines." And they talk to Eli's sons, and they're like, "Sure, we can do that." And so they grab the Ark of the Covenant, and they bring it to the Israelite camp, and the Israelites, they just stamp and cheer, and they make all kinds of noise, and the Philistines are like, "What's going on over there?" They send some scouts. The scouts come back and go, "Uh-oh, Ark of the Covenant's in the Israelite camp." And the Philistines say to one another, "Okay, look, we're probably going to die here, but let's die like men. We don't want to be slaves of the Israelites. Let's die like men." What the Philistines don't know is that the ark isn't supposed to be there. God didn't tell them to take the ark. This is a project that's operating without God's help, and God has no intention of being a lucky rabbit's foot for anybody. So in the battle the next day, the Philistines not only destroy the armies of Israel, but they capture the Ark of the Covenant, which is pretty good for them. And they take it back to one of their capital cities, and they put it in the temple of their god, a god named Dagon. Dagon has the lower body of a fish and the head and hands and arms of a man. And so they put the ark on the floor in front of the statue of Dagon. Now, back in Camp Israel, not only was the Ark of the Covenant captured, but Eli's two sons were killed in the battle. And a messenger runs back to Eli to give him the news. And Eli, he's old and blind and fat now, and he's sitting on a rock at the edge of the town waiting to hear some news. And the messenger comes and finds him and says to him, "Really bad news, boss. Your sons were both killed, and the Ark of the Covenant was captured." Eli falls backward off the rock, breaks his neck, and dies. In the same day, Eli and his sons are killed, and the Ark of the Covenant is captured. Next word in the phrase that pays, but. But. One word here, but. All right, so when we left the Ark of the Covenant, it was in the temple of Dagon, and the people go home and they go to bed. And the next morning, when they wake up to go to Dagon church, their god Dagon is laying on the floor, face down, in front of the Ark of the Covenant, like he's worshiping it. Well, that ain't right. So they pick Dagon up and they put him back on his stand, and they have Dagon church, and they go home. And the next morning they come, and Dagon is again laying in front of the Ark of the Covenant, but his head and his hands have broken off in the fall this time. So people get a little concerned. They fix Dagon and they put him back, on his pedestal. But then they start noticing that they don't feel really good. And a sickness spreads in the city, and they are covered with tumors and sores, and it's really bad, and some of them die. And they figure, it's this Ark of the Covenant that the God of Israel is punishing us. So they take the Ark and they bundle it up and they bring it to another Philistine city. And then they're fine, but the people in the new city get sick. The same deal, the tumors, the sores, the whole deal. It doesn't take them long to figure it out. And so they bundle it up and they bring it to a third city, and the third city says, "Hey, whoa, we don't want this thing. Do you think we want to get sick? Do you think we want to die? Send it back to Israel." Well, how do you do that exactly? What should we do? We captured this thing. We don't want to send it back, but we sure don't want to keep it. So they talk to their wise men, and the wise men say, it could just be coincidence that you're all sick. It doesn't necessarily mean that Israel's God is punishing you. So here's what you should do. You should take the ark and you should put it in a wagon, and you should put some presents in the wagon, just in case it is the God of Israel. You should put some gold in there. And then you should take 2 cows that don't know each other and have never pulled a wagon before. You should hook them to this wagon and put their calves over there, and don't feed the calves. Let them be hungry and bleeding. Now, if the cows go to take care of their calves, pull the wagon and just go to their calves, you'll know that it's just coincidence. But if these cows who've never pulled anything before, never pulled with each other, if they ignore the bleeding of their calves and march this ark into Israel, baby, you will know that God was at work, and that God wants his ark back, and it's going back to where it was supposed to be. So they do that. They think that's a great idea, and that's exactly what happens, that the ark goes back into Israel. Now, the Israelites, when they see it, they rejoice that the ark has come back to them. And so they take those 2 cows, and they kill them, and they sacrifice them. They build an altar, and they have burnt offerings, and they celebrate. But in the celebrating, some of those people forgot that you're not supposed to touch the ark unless you're a priest, and you're certainly not supposed to look into it. 70 guys decided the rules didn't apply to them. 70 guys died. I'm sure you're going to have questions about that. And so, the people of that town, that kind of destroyed the party, right? Kind of killed the buzz. So they call the Levites, and the Levites take the ark and they put it in, back in the company of one of their number. And so the ark is back in Israel, and people have learned another hard lesson. Now, next words, it's still. It's, I-T-S, still. So we got Samuel, who's functioning as the judge of Israel now, functioning as the prophet that's sort of in charge of Israel now, and the Philistines are controlling big pieces of Israel, and the people cry out to God, and Samuel says, well, you can't expect God's help. You got all this Baal worship going on everywhere. Clean up your houses, clean up your lives, talk to God and see what happens. And the people, they hear it, and they take it seriously, and they clean up their lives. They cut down their sacred groves. They pull down the altars of Baal. They say they're sorry to God. They start keeping the commandments again. And Samuel calls them all together to offer sacrifices and pray and to ask God to restore and to keep his people again. So they do that. Now, the Philistines get wind of this huge gathering of Israel, and they figure Israel's mustering its army. So they send their armies to this gathering. The people are there. They're not armed. They're not ready for war. They're here for church. And they see the Philistines gathering, and they are terrified, and they cry out to God. They cry out to Samuel. Samuel offers sacrifices, and he asks God to protect his people. And God sends this fierce rainstorm, and it's thunder and lightning and hail, and the Philistines panic, and in their panic, they start accidentally hitting and killing each other. They fall down, they're injured, they get trampled, and they wind up running back to their villages, and there is a temporary peace. There's a temporary clearing of Israel from the Philistines. Next 2 words, worth it. Worth it. All right? Now, the Israelites, they got Samuel, they've been freed from the Philistines, but they look around and they think, you know what we really need a king. Just relying on God to give us a judge here or there, or a prophet here or there, no, we need a guy. We need someone at the center. We need someone who's going to help us make stuff work, make stuff bounce. And other countries have kings. Why don't we have a king? And they go to Samuel and they say, we want a king. And Samuel says, are you mad? Didn't you just experience God setting you free from the Philistines? What's wrong with you? You have God. And Samuel goes to God, and God says to him, look, you're all bent out of shape. They're not rejecting you. They're rejecting me. So let them have what they want. I mean, you should warn them. You should definitely warn them. But then let them have what they want. So Samuel calls all the people together and he says, listen, you do not want a king. Yeah, we want a king. No, you don't. Let me tell you why. If you get a king, he is going to take your sons from you, and he is going to make them soldiers. He's going to make them run in front of his chariots. He's going to send them into battle. Some of them won't come home. You don't want a king. Yeah, we do. We want a king. No, he's going to take your daughters. Some of them will be bakers for him. Some of them will be perfumers. Some of them will be maids. Some of them will be in his harem. You do not want a king. Yeah, we do. No, you don't. He's going to take at least 1/10 of everything you earn. We still want a king. No, he's going to take your best fields, your best vineyards, and he's going to give them to his friends. You don't want a king. Yes, we want a king. No, you don't want a king. And someday you're going to figure this out and you're going to cry out to God, set us free, help us with this king. And God's not going to listen to you. Don't want a king. Yeah, we want a king. And so Samuel looks to God. I tried. Okay. God will give you a king. Now, Samuel goes about his business. He's got to find the king. People go about their business, right? And there's a guy, I think his name is Kish, something like that. We should say that this is quote that we've done today is another quote by C.S. Lewis. You need to put that C.S. Lewis. Anyway, Kish has a lot of livestock. He's a very rich guy. I'm not sure if his name is Kish. Let's say it's Kish. Kish is a very rich guy, and one day a bunch of his donkeys run away. And so he says to his son Saul, hey, grab a servant, grab some stuff, go find those donkeys. And Saul says, okay, Pop. And he heads out. Now they look everywhere. They can't find the donkeys. And they're about to give up because Saul says, Pop's going to be much more worried about us than he is about the donkeys. We should go home. And the servant says, yeah, it's a good idea. Let's just, Samuel, the holy man, lives over there. Let's go ask him if he, if God told him anything about our donkeys. And Saul says, I don't have a gift to give the holy man. And the servant says, I got a little bit of silver. It'll be enough. So they go to Samuel. And Samuel sees him coming and he says, hey, I'm having a party tonight. You want to come? And Saul is like, what? I mean, I'm just a kid looking for donkeys. And Samuel goes, no, you're going to be my honored guest tonight. And there's a party, and Saul's the honored guest at the party. And the next day, right, Samuel says to Saul, don't worry about the donkeys, they've been found. I'll walk you out back towards home. And so they walk out of town a little bit, and Samuel says to Saul, send your servant ahead a little bit. And so Saul does that, and Samuel says to Saul, God has chosen you, boy, to be the first king of Israel. And Saul is like, are you crazy? I'm not important. I'm young. What? And Samuel goes, no, it's you. And he anoints him. He pours olive oil on his head. He prays for him. And Saul is now the anointed king of Israel. Now, there's a lot that still has to come together. I mean, he has to be recognized by the people. He has to put his court together. He has to figure out what to do. But at the moment, he is the anointed king, and he goes home. And the donkeys are there, and he, his uncle asks him what happened. And he says, well, we talked to Samuel, and Samuel told us, that the donkeys were home. But he doesn't tell anybody that he's been anointed king of Israel. That's where we'll pause, and we will pick up, after, on the other side of Ash Wednesday, we'll pick up this story about Saul, the first king of Israel. All right. So you guys, you take care of yourself. Remember, there is no confirmation on February 16th. The lesson that we just shared, we will talk about on February 23rd. Work hard in school. Take care of yourself. Be good. And I look forward to seeing you soon. Bye-bye.